Rain hammered down on the city of Seattle that night like cold steel wires, lashing against the glass of the towering Seattle North Corporate Tower, which rose sharply into the dark sky. Inside, the long hallway remained lit with neon, bright white, yet chilling to the bone, the kind of light found only in buildings that work late, where people leave life behind on the other side of the glass. At the end of that hallway, a man was quietly pushing an aluminum cleaning cart. Ethan Walker, 38, a single father, a night shift janitor who seemed invisible to the world. A few steps ahead of him was a small girl, her pink hoodie slightly too big for her thin body. Lily, 8 years old. Her bright brown eyes reflected the entire world she believed in, a world where Dad was the safest place there was. Tonight, like every other night, Lily clutched an old stuffed rabbit, a toy that once belonged to her mother. Her mother was gone. And Ethan, no matter how exhausted he was, still brought Lily with him, because to him, the only thing that mattered was being able to see her every time he looked up. No one in this luxurious tower knew anything about their lives. No one cared to. To them, the janitor was just a shadow passing across a security camera. But that night, that shadow would change the entire building forever. Lily had just turned back to ask her dad for a snack from the vending machine when 3 figures stepped out of the stairwell. Not employees, not security. They carried something colder than the Seattle rain. Intent. Their eyes locked onto the little girl. Lily froze. Her mouth trembled. Then she screamed, a scream that tore through the empty hallway. "Daddy, please, help me!" In that instant, everything seemed ripped from the night. The clatter of the cleaning cart tipping over, the thudding footsteps against the floor, the rapid breathing of a man, and the instincts of a warrior suddenly awakened. There was no time for fear, no room for hesitation. In just 6 seconds, the hallway fell silent, so silent you could hear the rain outside the glass. Only after all 3 men lay motionless on the cold stone floor. Just 6 seconds. For the world to discover that Ethan Walker was not the man they thought he was. That night, as the sound of rain outside the glass mixed with Lily's trembling breaths, Ethan held her tightly, trying to keep his voice calm even though his heart was still pounding in hard, rapid beats. That calm did not come from being a janitor. It came from another life, one he had tried to bury for the past 8 years. At Seattle North Tower, no one knew Ethan had once been a member of SOG, the Strategic Operations Group, a top-secret unit specializing in hostage rescue and missions the government would never acknowledge. He had infiltrated borders under the cover of night, carried unfamiliar children in his arms while running through gunfire, and preserved the lives of others with a cold precision where not a single mistake was allowed to exist. But Ethan left all of that behind on the day he lost Emily, the only person who made him believe he could become someone different, a normal husband, a decent father. They once dreamed of a small home, children's laughter, and a life untouched by war. But Emily died the very moment Lily let out her first cry. Ethan's entire world collapsed in that instant, faster than any bullet he had ever faced. He left the unit, left his past, left the name that had once made enemies tremble. Seattle welcomed him with a night shift janitor job and an old apartment barely big enough for 2 people. Ethan accepted it all because from the day he lost Emily, he had only one reason left to exist. Lily. Every time he saw the little girl asleep in the corner of the staff room, clutching the worn-out stuffed rabbit, Ethan reminded himself he had chosen correctly. Invisible to the world, yet fully present in his daughter's life. He thought that quiet, humble life could last forever, but he didn't know that the very moment he took down 3 strangers in that bright hallway, just 6 short seconds, he had unintentionally sent out a signal that those who had hunted him for 2 decades had been waiting for in the shadows. At that exact moment, on the top floor of the tower, a woman was carrying a past no one knew about. Madison Cole, 35, was praised throughout Seattle as the model of a new generation of leadership, strong, decisive, razor-sharp in every meeting, and cold in every decision. But behind the perfect black suit and the confident steps of her high heels were wounds not everyone could see. Madison had been kidnapped at the age of 15, 4 days locked in a damp, dark room, hearing footsteps above her, never knowing if she would live to see the next day. The thing she remembered most clearly was not the fear, but the moment a man lifted her into his arms, sprinting through the forest at night, panting as he reassured her, "You're safe now. Hold on." She never saw the face of the person who saved her. She only remembered the feeling of absolute safety for the first time since her world had shattered. After that, everything was buried. Her powerful family drafted secrecy agreements, burying the truth to protect reputation and influence. Madison grew up with a quiet fear, turning it into motivation to become untouchable. She built her career on control, discipline, and never allowing herself to be vulnerable again. But what she could not control was the fact that someone had been watching her for months. Walking through the underground parking lot, she could feel eyes on her. At corporate events, the same faces appeared with an unusual frequency. The tighter she pulled her security team, the more the unease crept in like fog. And when she received word that 3 unknown men had appeared in the building late at night, precisely in the area she walked through every evening, Madison understood the thing she had avoided admitting. Her past had returned. But what she did not expect was that the one who took down those 3 men wasn't a bodyguard, wasn't the police, wasn't even her security manager, but a janitor. A man so quiet she had passed him dozens of times without ever noticing him. Something about the incident unsettled her, a faint instinct simmering like fire beneath ash, that this man was not who his employee file claimed he was. An instinct whispering that 2 lives that seemed worlds apart, hers and that anonymous man's, were about to intersect in a way no one could have predicted. And when the government motorcade rolled into the poor neighborhood where Ethan and Lily lived the next morning, Madison knew it was time to face that man. And perhaps to face her own past as well. The next morning, while Seattle was still wrapped in a thin layer of fog and the distant sound of a ship's horn echoed across the bay, the entire poor neighborhood where Ethan and Lily lived was suddenly awakened by an unusual sound. The steady, powerful engines of vehicles carrying a kind of solemnity that was hard to describe. 5 jet-black government SUVs turned into the pothole-ridden narrow street, making residents pause on their porches and kids stop their soccer game in the cramped alleyway. The doors opened, and Madison Cole stepped out. She still carried the aura of a CEO accustomed to facing rooms full of high-level executives, but in her eyes was something different. Determination mixed with a worry she failed to conceal as neatly as usual. A powerful female CEO appearing in a poor residential district with a government escort was a clear warning sign that a storm was brewing. Madison paid no attention to the phone's discreet recording of her. She only looked toward the patchy, fading apartment on the 3rd floor, the place where a man she didn't even know had saved her from disaster the night before. 3 knocks at the door, firm and low. When the door opened, Madison saw Ethan up close for the first time. No more hallway lights reflecting off him. No more distorted security footage. Just the real man. A face gaunt from sleepless nights, the broad shoulders of a former soldier still carrying the reflex of protection, and gray eyes both gentle and alert. as if he had lived his entire life on a line between safety and danger. Behind Ethan, Lily tilted her head slightly, clutching her stuffed rabbit, looking at Madison as though trying to understand why a fancy lady had stepped into the tiny world she shared with her father. Madison spoke, her voice unusually calm. "Mr. Walker, we need to talk." Ethan stepped aside to let her in. The cramped apartment, with its peeling walls and worn furniture, was the complete opposite of Madison's million-dollar boardrooms. But one thing made her pause. The half-finished bowl of cereal, the neatly hung child's jacket, and a small world where a father and daughter depended on each other to live. Madison glanced at Lily, then sat down on the faded chair. "About last night, what happened?" Ethan looked straight at her, his voice deep but steady. "I protected my daughter. That's all." "No one does what you did," Madison replied, emphasizing each word. She placed her phone on the table and turned the screen toward Ethan. The security footage played, the scene of him taking down 3 mercenaries in 6 seconds. 6 seconds of lethal precision. "A janitor doesn't do that," Madison said. Ethan didn't respond, but in that silence, Madison could sense an ocean of buried memories. She continued. "Those 3 men weren't petty criminals. They were trained mercenaries. And they weren't here for your daughter." Ethan looked up, his eyes shifting in an instant. Madison drew a slow breath. "They came for me." The room fell silent. Lily sat on the bed looking over, her small eyes widening slightly, sensing that something was wrong. Madison explained the past months, being followed, repeated faces at events, gaps in the security system, even after 3 rounds of fixes. "I think they were planning to take me," Madison said, her voice slowing. "But last night, they saw your daughter first. And opportunity always belongs to whoever acts faster." Ethan looked at Lily, the little girl fiddling with her stuffed rabbit's ear, unaware that in just a few hours, her entire world would change forever. "I need to know, Mr. Walker." Madison paused. "Who are you?" Ethan answered simply, "I'm just a father, trying to raise my child." "No." Madison met his eyes deeply enough that he had to hold her gaze. "You're the man who put 3 mercenaries on the floor in 6 seconds. And that makes both me and the person behind all this want to know who you are." The conversation was not just about uncovering information. It was the moment 2 completely different worlds collided. The world of a CEO carrying the scars of her past, and the world of a soldier who had tried to live like a ghost for 8 years. Ethan didn't know this was only the beginning, and Madison didn't yet know that the man standing in front of her was the very person who had carried her through the forest 20 years ago, when she was just a desperate young girl wishing to see the sun one more time. But destiny, no matter how late, always finds its way. And it had just knocked on Ethan Walker's door this morning. The air in the small apartment thickened, heavy like early winter Seattle fog. Madison Cole sat with her back straight on the worn, faded chair, her fingers interlaced, her eyes never leaving Ethan's face. It looked as if she were weighing every word, as though each sentence carried the potential to alter both their fates. Ethan saw the tension in her gaze. She didn't look like the cold CEO behind bulletproof glass on the 52nd floor. She looked like a person confronting the darkness she thought she had left behind. "Mr. Walker," Madison began, her voice dropping lower, "I think you understand. Those 3 from last night weren't the last." Ethan remained silent, and in that silence Madison understood he had known. perhaps from the moment he pushed Lily behind him after seeing the men in the hallway. She took a security card from her jacket pocket and placed it gently on the table. The screen lit up, displaying images of the 3 men, caught by her security team several times over the past 3 months. They appeared at events she attended, in the company parking garage, even at the airport when she landed from New York. Never too close, but close enough to leave a trail of invisible footprints. "We thought it was corporate espionage," Madison said. "But then we realized their target wasn't data, wasn't the company. It was me." Ethan studied each face on the screen. His eyes shifted. He recognized details most people would never notice. The shift in their center of gravity, the way they kept their wrists, the tight European mercenary haircut, and the emptiness in their eyes. Something only seen in those who had crossed too many moral lines. "They're well-trained," Ethan said. "And well-funded." Madison nodded. "We followed the money, and the trail led to one name." She opened another file. The photo of a man appeared, neatly groomed gray hair, a polite smile, but calculating eyes. Jacob Ross. Ethan froze, not from surprise, but from recognition. Madison saw the change in his eyes and asked quietly, "You know him?" Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "Not just know him. I dismantled his operation 20 years ago." The room fell so silent that the ticking of the wall clock became painfully loud. Madison asked slowly, "Which operation?" Ethan met her gaze. "A 15-year-old girl, kidnapped near the outskirts of Portland. I was the one who carried her through the forest. She kept crying and asking if she was going to live." Madison stiffened. She couldn't breathe for several seconds. The man standing right in front of her, the man she had always thought of as a nameless janitor, with the very hands that tore her out of the darkness and brought her back to the light when she was 15. Memories flooded back. The damp smell of the forest, the heavy but steady footsteps, the ragged breath of the man carrying her, and the soft voice threading through the chaos. "You're safe. Now, I'll get you home." Madison turned away, but the tears still fell, not from fear, but because for 20 years she believed that man was a ghost she would never find again. She didn't know if he was alive, nor did she know if he was aware of how deeply she owed him. She inhaled, trying to steady her breath. "Why did you never say anything?" Ethan answered gently. "Because I wasn't allowed to know who you were." After a rescue, identities were shielded. It kept people safer. Madison nodded slightly, as if understanding a deeper layer of the man before her. A profound silence settled over the room, not the silence of doubt, but the silence of realization, of destiny's pieces finally sliding into place after 2 decades. And then Ethan's voice lowered, carrying a truth heavier than the past. "If Jacob Ross is back, then he's not just after you. He'll go after the person who matters most to me." Madison looked toward Lily, the little girl innocently playing with the rabbit's floppy ear, unaware that the world outside had just changed colors. "You think he won't stop?" Madison asked. Ethan shook his head. "No. He's been waiting for this chance for 20 years. And in that moment, both understood. The coming battle wasn't just against a dangerous enemy. It was against a piece of the past, determined to swallow everything they were fighting to protect. The story of Jacob Ross cut into the stillness of the small apartment like a twisting blade. Madison was still trembling from the realization that the man standing before her, a single father living in a cheap room, a janitor everyone walked past without looking, was the same man who had carried her out of hell 20 years ago. But that emotion, barely formed, was crushed by a larger truth. Ross had returned. And he wasn't just hunting Madison. He was targeting the child sitting a few feet away from him, Lily. In an instant, Madison saw the worry flicker in Ethan's eyes, a fear even a seasoned operative couldn't hide when it involved his child. As if the universe wanted to confirm that fear, a strange sound echoed from the window. Ethan frowned and moved toward it with instincts no janitor possessed. He pulled the curtain aside. A small drone hovered just outside the glass, its blinking green light like the cold stare of someone watching. Not a store-bought drone. This one carried a military-grade camera and an engine as quiet as breath. Ethan didn't hesitate. He slid the window open in a single swift motion, grabbed the broom from the kitchen corner and struck the drone with a throw so precise it seemed impossible. The drone faltered, then fell into the alley behind the building. Ethan bolted down the stairs, but by the time he reached the spot where it fell, the drone was gone. No fragments, no footprints, nothing. As if someone had been waiting in the shadows just to retrieve it, vanishing before Ethan could even catch his breath. Madison listened to his recounting and her face paled. They were watching Lily. Ethan nodded, his jaw tight as stone. They know she's my weakness. Madison clasped her hands together, then said firmly, You and your daughter can't stay here. Ethan shook his head instantly. I won't run. This isn't running, Madison replied. It's protecting her. Bring Lily to the tower tonight. There's security, controlled access, and federal agents on standby. Ethan looked around the apartment where he and Lily had taken shelter for 8 years. Cramped, worn, but home. Suddenly, it looked painfully fragile. Then he looked at Lily. She was sitting on the floor, drawing a crooked flower with colored pencils, unaware that the outside world was watching her every step. Ethan inhaled deeply. If I move her into your tower, they'll know. They already do, Ethan, Madison said quietly. But there, at least they can't touch her. In that moment, Ethan realized something worse than anything that had happened the night before. He was no longer anonymous. The strength he used to protect his daughter was the same signal that told his enemies the ghost from years ago had resurfaced. Ethan brushed Lily's hair. Where are we going, Daddy? She asked, her voice clear and innocent, as if moving homes were the simplest thing in the world. To a safer place, Ethan replied gently. Will I get to see the sun? Lily asked. Ethan smiled. Yes, sweetheart. You'll even get to see the whole city. Madison watched the two of them, and in that moment she felt something strange. For 20 years, she had built concrete walls around her heart, never to feel helpless again. But watching father and daughter holding hands, she realized some things no wall can keep out, like the bond of a family or the determination of a parent. The only thing she could do was stand with them, just as Ethan had once stood with her when she was a terrified girl in a cold, dark room. Ethan, Madison said, her voice softening for the first time. This isn't just your fight or mine anymore. We're on the same side. Ethan met her eyes. What he saw wasn't the power of a CEO, but a very human fear, and an unspoken promise that she wouldn't let Lily become a target. All right, Ethan nodded. We go. And in that moment, when the decision was spoken, an unlikely alliance was formed. Not from contracts, not from shared advantage, but from two wounded pasts intersecting, and a shared commitment to the most important thing, the safety of a child. But in the shadows of Seattle, where streetlights flickered like warning eyes, Jacob Ross was already preparing his next move, and he knew one thing for sure. When a father like Ethan grows alert, he must strike faster, harder, more ruthlessly. Tonight, the tower would be safe. But not for long, because a new storm was coming. That night, the Seattle North Tower blazed like a fortress in the heart of the city. The lights from the 52nd floor reflected against the glass, forming a long beam like a lighthouse, marking the only place in the night where Lily might still be safe. Madison had arranged her office into a temporary sleeping space for the father and daughter, a sofa folded into a small bed for Lily, soft pillows, and a cup of warm milk waiting on the table. It looked like the cozy corner every child deserved to have. Ethan didn't sleep. He stood by the glass window watching the city exhale long breaths into the cold night air. The streetlights glowed a yellowish hue, like the eyes of something watching. Wind hissed through the cracks, and somewhere within Seattle's vague nighttime hum, he sensed something only those who had lived on battlefields could understand. The silence wasn't usual. When Lily had fallen asleep, Madison stepped into the small adjoining room and found Ethan standing alone. "You don't have to stay up all night," she said softly. Ethan didn't take his eyes off the view below. Force of habit. For a moment, Madison saw in his eyes the cold glint of someone who had stood on too many edges between life and death. The same glint she had seen 20 years ago, when he carried her beneath the black canopy of the forest. She was about to speak again when the tower lights flickered, then went out. The entire 52nd floor fell into thick darkness. Not a power outage. Ethan knew. Madison knew. It had been shut off. Intentionally. Deliberately. A second later, Ethan's hand covered Madison's mouth, signaling for absolute silence. He tilted his head, listening. Footsteps. Light. Purposeful. More than one person. They weren't running. They weren't breaking anything. They moved upward through the floors, slowly and steadily, as if they weren't in a hurry, as if they knew exactly what they were closing in on. Madison whispered, "They hacked the system." Ethan nodded and disabled the alarms. He walked to the maintenance cabinet, which was usually filled with office supplies. Of course, there were no weapons. But Ethan pulled out a large fire extinguisher, gripping it as if it weighed no more than a baton. He turned to Madison. "Take Lily to the back conference room. It's the top floor, only one entrance." "And you?" Madison asked, though she already knew the answer. "I'll buy time," he said, his voice low and resolute. Madison touched his arm. "You don't have to do this alone." Ethan looked at her, his gaze so steady it stopped her breath. "They're here for you and for me. But the child..." He glanced toward Lily, sleeping peacefully. "She's done nothing wrong." A second later, Ethan stepped out of the room and closed the door. As it clicked shut, Madison scooped Lily into her arms and hurried into the back conference room, locking the heavy security latch. Outside, the hallway began to glow red as the emergency lights switched to manual mode. Metallic clicks, boots hitting the floor, dark figures moving soundlessly. Ethan drew a long breath. Every cell in his body slipped back into the state he had buried for years. The state of the ghost. No more cleaning carts, no more mops, no more nightly exhaustion of a single father. Only the warrior, the predator in the dark. The man who once terrified enemies at the borders of Afghanistan and South America. They didn't know who he had been, didn't know he was waiting just around the corner. But they would, and they wouldn't live long enough to tell anyone. The first man to step onto the 52nd floor hallway saw only darkness. He did not see Ethan. He only heard a rush of air and had just enough time to turn before the fire extinguisher slammed into his temple, dropping him without a sound. The two others flinched, but a flinch was slower than Ethan. He slid beneath the second attacker's reach, as if the floor had turned to ice, and swept his legs out cleanly. The third man drew a knife, but Ethan had already seized his wrist, twisted, and snapped the joint with a sharp, dry crack. All three were down in under 20 seconds. Ethan exhaled hard. Heat rose through his bloodstream. The red emergency glow reflected in his eyes, colder than steel. But that was only the first team. From down the corridor, muffled voices seeped into the cold air. Not English, Eastern European. "Find them!" Ethan gave a short, humorless laugh of recognition. "Jacob," he muttered, "you really sent everyone." From the far end of the hallway, 7 more dark figures advanced, this time with suppressed weapons, with technique, with tactical formation. But Ethan didn't step back. He only tightened his grip on the fire extinguisher, spinning it like an ancient warrior would a steel mace, and whispered to himself, a vow rising from the deepest part of his soul. "No one touches my daughter." That night, the tower became a battlefield, and Ethan Walker returned to what he truly was, a ghost in the corridor, where the hunters became the hunted. The hallway on the 52nd floor now looked like the gaping mouth of some enormous beast swallowing light, leaving only the dim red haze of emergency lamps mixed with tense, shallow breaths. Ethan moved without a sound, as if his feet knew every centimeter of this tower. He could hear even the smallest noises, the faint scrape of a safety catch against a gun strap, the hurried inhale of an intruder, and the metallic clicking from the left, a signal that the large glass door was being cut open. They were getting closer. Ethan knew he was getting weaker. Blood from the cut on his side ran in thin streams, soaking into his shirt. But he also knew this. When a man is pushed past the limits of flesh, the only thing left to fight with is will. And a father's will never run dry. Glass shattered. A figure dropped through the skylight of the adjacent conference room, slamming into the floor. Another mercenary rappelled from the tower's roof, bursting in through the window as if even the sky had turned against Ethan. He was strong, fast, and ruthless. They grappled across the floor, crashing into the conference table, chairs clattering everywhere, the intruder's hot breath mixing with the sharp stench of gunpowder. The knife twirled in the man's hand, slicing dangerously close to Ethan's ribs. One wrong slip, and it would be over. But Ethan did not slip. The instant the blade grazed his skin, he twisted, yanking the man's collar and using the oldest SOG instinct, use the enemy's force against them to defeat them. One turn, one slam against the edge of the table. The mercenary collapsed like an empty sack. Ethan gasped for breath. Every inch of him burned like thousands of needles stabbing at once. But the sound of a door opening behind him erased all sensation. 3 more figures walked in. This time, they had laser sights, beams of cold red light cutting through the darkness. And among them stood Jacob Ross. He entered like a man stepping onto his private stage, charcoal gray suit, perfectly fixed tie, the eyes of someone who'd lived too long in the shadows and believed himself untouchable. His neatly combed gray hair made him look polished, but his mind was rotten, feeding on other people's lives to survive. When the flashlight beam landed on Ethan, blood-covered, still gripping the fire extinguisher, Jacob let out a small laugh. "Ethan Walker. Or should I call you Ghost, like the old days?" Ethan stood upright, not afraid, not shaking, just a cold steadiness. Jacob smirked. You made me wait 20 years. I thought you were dead. Turns out, you're mopping floors. Ethan replied softly but sharp as a blade. Cleaning floors is more useful than anything you've ever done. The smile vanished from Jacob's face. His eyes sharpened, then turned poisonous. You destroyed my business, he said slowly. You cost me millions. You forced me to run, and now you leave 3 of my men lying in the hallway like garbage. Ethan didn't blink. I saved a child. Jacob laughed bitterly. A child. He stepped closer. That girl was a senator's daughter, and this time, I have something far more valuable. Ethan's eyes turned razor sharp. You touch my daughter, and I'll end you. If I wanted to, Ethan, Jacob whispered, she wouldn't be breathing right now. He chuckled like he'd just told a joke. But I wanted to see you. Wanted to erase with my own hands everything you think you're protecting. Ethan tightened his grip on the extinguisher. Jacob nodded to his men. Kill him. A pause. No need to be quick. They lunged. Ethan fought as if his body remembered the motions without thought. He ducked under the muzzle, spun, and slammed the extinguisher into the first man's arm, knocking the gun away. He kicked the second square in the chest, spinning to avoid the chokehold from the third. Every movement was a combination of instinct, desperation, and pure love for Lily, intertwined. But these 3 didn't fall like the others. A hit to his injured side forced Ethan to one knee. A kick slammed him against the glass wall. The extinguisher rolled away, spinning across the floor. The third man drew a knife. The metal gleamed. Ethan knew he had to stand, but his legs were beginning to buckle. At that exact moment, a scream tore across the hallway. Daddy! Lily. Madison tried to pull her back, but the girl had already run out, tears streaming down her tiny face. That single moment shrank Ethan's entire world into one point, the point where Lily stood trembling, eyes wide with terror. That terror ignited a fire inside the collapsing man. Ethan rose, not by strength, but by a father's will. He slammed the attacker's head into the wall, twisted, disarmed the knife from the third man, and struck the second down with the back of the blade. Only one remained. Ethan charged, driving him against the glass door, punching relentlessly until the man went still. Ethan's breathing was ragged, blood dripping down his arm, his body ready to collapse. But he stood between Lily and Jacob like a shield. Jacob watched, growling. You should have died 8 years ago. Ethan stepped forward, each step heavy as stone. You should have stopped 20 years ago. Jacob drew his gun. Shoot. The bullet grazed Ethan's shoulder, spraying blood. Shoot. The second passed by his ear. Jacob exhaled, lifting the gun again, but Ethan was already in front of him. He struck the gun from Jacob's hand, spun him around, and slammed him into the floor. The two wrestled, punching, twisting, clawing, breaths mixing with sweat and desperation. Jacob tried to rise, but Ethan pinned his head to the ground. 1 second. 2. 3. Then Jacob went still. Ethan froze, panting, his whole body ready to fall apart. He turned and saw Lily. She ran to him, throwing her arms around him, sobbing. Daddy, I thought you... Ethan held her with his one good arm, his voice hoarse but warm. It's okay, sweetheart. I'm here. I'm always here. In that moment, Madison stood behind them, her arms dropping, her shoulders finally light for the first time in years. She watched the bloodied man holding his small daughter, the man who had once saved her life, and now saved the one person he loved most. A tear slipped down her cheek, not from fear, but because she understood something. Sometimes light returns from the places we thought were long gone. When police sirens echoed from the streets below, blue and red lights flashing against the glass walls of the 52nd floor, Ethan finally allowed himself a deep breath. His legs collapsed beneath him, his body surrendering at last to the injuries, but his arms never let go of Lily. The girl clung to him, tears soaking into his shirt, holding on as if the moment she loosened her grip, her father would disappear into the darkness. Madison stood beside them, silent. She simply watched the two, the exhausted man who still raised a hand to pat his child's head gently, and the small girl clutching a blood-stained shirt, unaware that the very body she held had just risked everything to protect her. A long silence stretched across the room, so still that when the rapid response team burst in, the sound of their boots felt like hammers slamming into the air. FBI, city police, federal tactical units, they flooded the tower like a crashing waterfall. But they didn't find a battle. They found the aftermath. They saw mercenaries lying motionless across the hallway, shattered glass, and the unmistakable trail of a man who had fought to his very last ounce of strength for his daughter. When the medics approached, Ethan still held Lily. It wasn't until Madison knelt beside him, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said softly, so softly, "Ethan, let them treat your wounds. I'll hold Lily." Only then did Ethan nod, not because he trusted the medics, but because he trusted Madison. At the hospital, cold white lights reflected in Ethan's tired eyes. Doctors stitched the wound on his shoulder, wrapped his ribs, and checked the injuries from the fight. A few of them stared at him with disbelief, as if silently asking how an ordinary man could survive a battle like that. But to Ethan, survival wasn't a miracle. Lily was the only miracle he needed. When the pain finally eased, a man in a suit walked in, a federal agent. His eyes did not carry the look of a doctor or a police officer, but the look of someone who recognized a warrior. "Mr. Walker," he began, "we've reviewed the report, and it's been many years since I've seen anyone do what you did tonight." Ethan looked toward the hallway where Lily slept, curled up on a chair with Madison beside her keeping watch. He replied quietly, "I did what any father would do." The agent gave a faint smile. "No, Ethan. Any father would want to do it, but only very, very few actually can." He placed a folder on the table. "We want you back." The room suddenly felt colder. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment. He knew this offer would come. Men like him, once exposed, were always pulled back into the shadows that once owned them. "Good pay," the agent continued. "Full insurance for Lily. Paid leave. And a position reserved only for those who survived SOG." Ethan looked at the man, then at his daughter sleeping peacefully. "I used to be a weapon," Ethan said, slowly. "But now I'm just a father." The agent's brow tightened. "You're turning down a chance to return to the highest tier?" "I'm choosing my daughter," Ethan answered, without a second of hesitation. Silence filled the room. Then the agent nodded, with genuine respect this time, and left, his footsteps fading down the corridor. As night settled over the hospital, Madison entered. She had changed out of her crisp red dress into a long coat, looking less like a CEO and more like simply a human being. "Ethan," she said gently, "I also have an offer." He let out a faint laugh. "Don't tell me you want me to become your personal operative." Madison smiled, The first genuine smile since the night began. "No, I want you to be the head of security for our tower." Ethan started to refuse immediately, but Madison lifted her hand. "Good salary, stable hours, a proper apartment for you and your daughter, and Lily will always be in the safest building in the city." Ethan looked at Madison. What he saw in her eyes wasn't pity, but gratitude wrapped beneath her steel composure. "This isn't charity," Madison said. "You saved my life twice. How could I possibly watch Lily grow up in a place like that?" Ethan stayed quiet for a long moment. Then he looked toward Lily, sleeping peacefully, her soft breaths like spring wind. "I don't need much, Madison. I just want her to grow up in peace," Madison answered immediately, her voice softer than ever. "And that's exactly what I want to help you build." Ethan's shoulders dropped, as if he had been carrying years of weight and had finally been allowed to set it down. He nodded, small but certain. "All right, I'll take it." Madison smiled, the faintest smile, but the warmest one she'd ever worn. In that moment, there were no CEOs and janitors, no rescued victim and rescuer. Only two people who had once been touched by darkness and were now choosing to stand together in the light. 3 months had passed since the night the tower became a battlefield. Seattle was raining less. Soft, golden mornings had begun weaving across the surface of Lake Union, and the city seemed to breathe more steadily after the chaos that no one, except those involved, knew had ever happened. In the park near the upscale apartment complex, Madison had arranged for the father and daughter. Ethan Walker stood behind the swing, gently pushing Lily as she laughed brightly. The little girl kicked her legs into the air, her hair flying with the wind, her laughter ringing out like the most beautiful sound Ethan had heard in years, after so long knowing only gunfire and fear. He watched her with the eyes of a man who had finally found a reason to breathe softly. Madison sat on a wooden bench nearby, wearing a thin, cream-colored sweater instead of her usual sharp, executive-style dresses. Her hair wasn't tied neatly anymore. She let it fall naturally, smooth under the sunlight. Anyone who saw this moment would think the three of them were simply a family enjoying a weekend outing, a simple family, untouched by storms, not carrying wounds deep enough to destroy them from the inside once. But both Ethan and Madison understood it was the storm that had carried them to this peaceful shore. When Lily jumped off the swing and ran toward them, Ethan lifted her mid-air as if she were the most precious thing in his life.
"Daddy, did you see? I was flying!"
"Yes, you were flying really high," Ethan laughed, kissing her forehead. Madison smiled at the sight, a rare smile, genuine, without any of the usual walls. Lily suddenly grabbed both their hands, one small hand holding her father's, the other holding Madison's. Then she asked innocently, "Daddy, we're safe now, right? The bad people, they're gone?" It was a small question, but Ethan felt his heart tighten. He knelt, eye level with her, gently brushing her soft hair. "Yes, sweetheart, we're safe now. I promise." Behind him, Madison quietly wiped the corner of her eye. It wasn't just a promise for Lily. It was the promise Madison herself had wanted to hear for 2 decades, ever since she was a terrified 15-year-old locked in a windowless room. Lily thought for a moment, then asked, voice tiny, "So, is Mommy happy that we're here?" Both Ethan and Madison froze. The moment was so fragile that even the passing breeze felt like a sigh. Ethan looked at his daughter, then up at the soft, spring blue sky. "Yes, Mommy would be very happy. And she'd be proud of you. Of all of us." Lily smiled lightly, then ran toward the ice cream cart nearby. Ethan stood and Madison came to stand beside him. They didn't speak, but their eyes met with a shared understanding, the understanding of people who had survived something few ever do. Madison said softly, "Thank you for letting me be a part of your lives." Ethan looked at her, his gaze sincere like a morning over the lake. "Actually, you've been there for a long time. I just didn't know it was you." Madison let out a small laugh, the laugh of a woman who had finally rediscovered the softness she'd lost years ago. Then, without warning, she gently placed her hand into his, not to ask, not to take, but to begin. No rush, no vows, just two people who had once been torn apart by life, now standing together like two pieces of driftwood washed onto the same shore. From afar, Lily called out,
Daddy! Madison! The strawberry ice cream is so good. Come try some.
And so they walked toward her, two adults learning how to smile again, and the little girl who only knew that today had sunshine, strawberry ice cream, and hands that would always catch her. Sometimes light doesn't appear like a blazing sun in the sky. It arrives quietly, like a hand slipping into yours when you no longer think you deserve to be held. It comes from the people you never expected to meet, on the days you didn't believe in anything. And on that peaceful Seattle morning, three people once threatened by darkness found the most precious thing they thought they had lost forever: a family. Finally, as the sun laid its golden bands over that small park, Ethan, Madison, and Lily sat together on the wooden bench beneath the maple tree. Lily happily nibbled on her strawberry ice cream, her little legs swinging in the air, while the two adults sat beside each other in a comfortable silence. The kind of silence that exists only when the heart has finally found a safe place to rest. No more gunfire, no more shadows watching from afar, no more nightmares they had both carried for far too long. Only gentle light, a child's laughter, and the moment Ethan realized something he once believed he would never find again: peace. Madison looked at Lily, then at Ethan, her gaze light as a breeze. Sometimes we don't get to choose the wounds we carry, but we can choose who helps us heal them. Ethan smiled, a faint warmth in his eyes, something he hadn't felt in many years. And sometimes, family isn't something you're born into. It's something that finds you when you need it most. In that moment, the three people who once stood at the edge of darkness stepped fully into the sunlight. And that was the most extraordinary miracle life had given them. Thank you for listening to this story. If you felt a bit of warmth in your heart, a bit of faith, or even just a single peaceful moment, share it. Because sometimes all it takes is a story touching the right place to remind us that kindness still exists, even in the most ordinary people. Leave a comment, a like, or a share if you'd like to walk with Deep Life Tales, where every story is a gentle reminder that we were never truly alone.